We are ready to start a new era of pro football. It's the premiere of The Alliance on CBS as the Orlando Apollos host the Atlanta Legends at Spectrum Stadium here in Orlando, Florida. And hi, everyone. Welcome to Orlando with 13-year NFL veteran Gary Danielson. I'm Andrew Catalan. Melanie Collins will join us coming up. And Gary, you're no stranger to new football leagues. Got your football card here.
There.
The 1974 World Football League, the New York Stars. Gary has a mustache in this picture. Fast forward to tonight, what are your expectations for the Alliance?
You know, I think when people watch the game, and I went to San Antonio and watched the preseason games, we've been around here, I think they're going to say, wow, these guys aren't good enough to play in the league. Well, most of them are, but they weren't in the right place at the right time, and a league has come along to give them another shot.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Good golly, Miss Molly, I can't believe that we're actually doing this episode this week. Hi there, friends. My name is Tim Hanlon, and this is Good Seats Still Available, our curious little podcast, our journey, our exploration, our investigation each and every week into what used to be in professional sports. And I can't tell you that I would have even envisioned doing an episode on the Alliance of American Football so soon. Given the beginning of this year, everybody, by all indications, would have thought that this was built to last at least for one season, for God's sakes. But no, alas, it has fallen into disarray and bankruptcy so soon after launching. And we're going to get into it with our guest this week, Conor Orr from Sports Illustrated, who's written probably the two best pieces about this league that came and went so very quickly. And obviously, this is the beginning of what will be a long time investigation into what went wrong, and frankly, some of the things that went right with the Alliance of American Football. And the articles that I commend to you to read, either online or in printed form, if you could find a copy of Sports Illustrated, the April 30th and the May 8th issues of Sports Illustrated, or you can go online to si.com and search up these articles. It's the curious rise and spectacular crash of the Alliance of American Football. And part two is called More Strange Tales from the Collapse of the AAF. And Conor Orr, the writer of both pieces, is the guest this week to kind of get into some of it. We're only going to scratch the surface. But it is the beginning of what will likely be a very interesting series of stories to unfold in the months and maybe even years to come about what happened, what the hell went wrong with this thing called the Alliance of American Football. It's a story of Charlie Ebersol, the son of television production legend Dick Ebersol and NBC Sports chairman emeritus, the guy, Dick, who with Vince McMahon put together the XFL back in 2001, a spectacular event and ultimately failure back then. And Charlie, having done a documentary about the rise and fall of that league and getting real close to the subject matter at hand and figuring out that perhaps that he might have a better shot at trying to do a springtime football league, perhaps better, more well thought out, and maybe with a vision towards where technology in the future of football, maybe even a hint of how gambling might evolve over time. All good things, all good ideas. Some investors from supposedly solid backgrounds, all part of this mix and part of this adventure and this journey. But as you heard somewhat ominously in the beginning of this little show, do you dare reference the World Football League in your first broadcast? Well, I guess that's what Andrew and Gary Danielson did. And you know, I guess they didn't think that this was going to sort of besmirch them, but indeed, it didn't even last as long as the first year of the World Football League, for God's sakes, if you can believe that. But that's the topic that we're going to get into to at least start our journey into the Alliance of American Football with our guest, Conor Orr. And boy, oh boy, lots of characters and lots of little intrigues in this investigation. And we encourage you to give a listen to this conversation with Conor, just coming up in a couple of moments. Fascinating is an understatement. And we're going to get to it in just a couple of seconds. But before we do so, I want to get into our promotional banter, shall we, with one of our great sponsors. And this week, we spin the dial to our friends at Streaker Sports. Yes, you can find them at streakersports.com. Yep, they are the purveyor of sports culture. It is a trove of fun stuff that they've got in T-shirts and activewear, polo shirts and caps and all kinds of cool stuff, shorts even, all kinds of great stuff. And there's lots of sports and lots of products that they've got out there. But as you know, we like to obviously highlight things that are relatively close to our little neck of the woods. And that's, of course, anything in the realm of defunct leagues. And yep, if you go to the special collections section at streakersports.com and go to that special collections tab, and you want to go down to the defunct league section, oh my goodness, you're going to find great T-shirts in remembrance of a whole bunch of leagues, maybe the AAF at some point. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod. But while we wait for for T-shirts and other remembrances of the now old Alliance of American Football, why don't you take a look at what Streaker Sports has for you in the realm of the ABA, the American Basketball Association, or the USFL. Yep, there you go. A forgotten sports football league that tried to make a go of it in the spring. The World Hockey Association, some great stuff there at streakersports.com. And interestingly, in the realm of the original indoor, well, one of the original indoor lacrosse leagues, the Major Indoor Lacrosse League, all those 4 leagues and many, many other things there too will just delight you and perhaps even entice you to make a purchase or two at streakersports.com. Really cool stuff from all 4 of those leagues. And once you find something that you love, and I'm pretty certain you're going to find something that you love, make sure that you use the promo code GOODSEATS, will you? Promo code GOODSEATS. Yep, they enter that in at checkout, and you're going to get 10% off all of your purchases at streakersports.com. Some really great stuff there. College lacrosse. They've got a Caddyshack collection there. They've got an homage to the Mighty Ducks, as well as I said, all those defunct leagues that we just mentioned, and many, many more things for you to enjoy and check out at streakersports.com. Make sure you use that promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. No AAF stuff yet, but we can hope and keep our fingers crossed. Goodness knows that the logos of the teams and the emblems and the names of the teams themselves, pretty well thought out, I thought, and well designed. And I'm hopeful that Streaker Sports will take advantage of offering some of those great logos on shirts and stuff from the AAF in the months to come. Let's keep our fingers crossed. But in the interim, to keep you interested in the topic at hand, here is our conversation that we had literally just a couple of days ago with Conor Orr from Sports Illustrated. And let's get into it. The Alliance of American Football. Fascinating conversation coming right at you. This little show for the last, 2 years or so, we've been focused on, teams and leagues no longer with us, lots of defunctness or bolting for other cities, a weird fascination. And by the way, goes back dozens of years into, the earliest days of baseball once you get down to it. But I got to tell you, there are enough of our listeners who are just fascinated, as I guess I am, with, it doesn't take too much time for people don't want to wait for the body to be, to be fully cold yet before they go into it. So maybe you could give our audience a little bit of a sense of who you are, an SI guy. Did you have to draw straws for this story, or was this something that you kind of just leapt into to do yourself because of its just, amazing flame out quality, and perhaps it seems like a well-oiled story ready to go?
Yeah, so I got really lucky because I had been kind of covering the Alliance a little bit since its launch. And what I've been telling a lot of other people is it was a gold mine for football reporters because they were desperate for access, and they had, access to great football people. And so, if you needed to talk to Mike Martz for a story, or, Dennis Erickson or Steve Spurrier or Trent Richardson, all these guys were available, 5 days a week. Their PR people were eager to put them on the phones. And so that's kind of what got me into, paying attention to the Alliance because I was like, okay, great. If not nothing else, people that can help me with stories, people that can help me, round out other features that I was working on at the time. And then, the day that the league closed down, I remember, it was April 2nd. I just thought, okay, I had gotten a tip probably about half an hour earlier from somebody else who had been observing the league from afar, but knew that I'd been covering it, and said, hey, you should probably start paying attention to this. There's some stuff going on here. And then from that moment on, reporting it out that day, talking to some of the contacts that I have in the league, I was like, wow, this is going to be a pretty amazing story, and luckily my bosses were behind it all the way and said, let's do this.
Yeah, we're recording this the second week of May, so this is literally a first sort of post-mortem take on a story that I'm sure will have plenty more twists and turns to go. But it sounds like that this was almost sort of like you were developing almost a beat for yourself in the early days with this league. Is that right?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, certainly, being part of the Monday morning quarterback section of SI, we're all professional football all the time, but I love the idea of a developmental league. I think that there will one day be a sustainable developmental league, and maybe that's the XFL. I think that we're not far away from seeing juniors and seniors who are physically mature enough in college that will go take the $250,000 paycheck and play professionally for 2 years until they're ready to get into the NFL. I think all that is coming. We're really close to that. And so I think it's just a really interesting supplement, right? Because when we go to the combine every year to talk to coaches and scouts and general managers, I mean, now we're running into XFL people, we're running into Alliance people, we're running into all the guys that are in this orbit. And so I think you can't ignore it, even if, I would consider myself, I guess, a pretty just standard traditional NFL reporter. Well,
let's just start sort of, I guess, from the beginning, I guess, in terms of the arc of this story, right? Because like a lot of people, we were all fascinated a couple of years ago with, and I'll speak for myself, I'm a documentary freak, and when it gets into sports and sports history, even doubly so. And the doc that Charlie Ebersol, son of legendary television and sports executive at NBC Sports, Dick Ebersol, put together on the story of the original XFL, which for you youngins out there, right, was the one-year wonder, shall we say, its own amazing story, and made for tremendous documentary fodder between Dick Ebersol and, of course, Vince McMahon, aforementioned, who ironically is bringing back this XFL thing in a newer form next year. But my sense is that, number one, here you have a, shall we say, budding documentarian, the apple falling proverbially not too far from the tree, I guess. But then two, also kind of, I guess sort of getting a sense, or at least some level of confidence that, hey, this football thing maybe could have been done better. And my investigation of the story of how the first go-around didn't work, it almost seems to me like there was maybe, I don't know, an irrational exuberance about Charlie's possible opportunity to maybe do it himself the second time around. Is that rooted in reality, or is that just too early or facile a comment at this point?
No, I think that there was certainly an exuberance there. And then, I think what really got it off the ground is if you combine that personal energy with what's going on right now in Silicon Valley, what's going on in the sports technology world, what's going on in the sports television world, I think it was a perfect storm to kind of hit Charlie specifically, because you have this young, good-looking entrepreneurial guy, likes to do things differently, aggressively. I mean, his name in the reality TV circuit, beyond that documentary that he produced, is fairly well known. I think the Hollywood Reporter listed him as one of the 30 biggest power players in that industry. And so, for somebody who thinks like that, and then somebody who has a lot of these high-profile people in his ear, whether it was, early on they were associated with Peter Thiel and the Founders Fund and Chernin and the Barstool Group and all that stuff. You start hearing stuff like that. You start thinking like a tech pioneer, and then you get hooked up with guys like Eric Schwartz from Yahoo and people from Tesla and Lockheed Martin, and all of a sudden, you're full bore on this. You have your sales out, and you're ready to start a professional football league that doubles as a tech company.
Well, and that said, though, for those who have been involved in the sort of tech startup space, I actually professionally day job have been with in the media and advertising technology space. There's also a hefty dollop of lemming like following and belief, and or not wanting to be the guy or the person to maybe miss out on the next big thing, and yet not necessarily vetting everything out per se, or assuming that other people along the line or in the process or in the investment pool have it all figured out, and they don't want to look stupid by comparison.
I think that's a great way to put it. Someone else in the business that wasn't associated with Alliance told me that where we are in sports tech is pre-Wild West. We're not even Wild West yet. And so you combine that landscape with what you're talking about, this developing sort of, pirate mentality, all these kind of high-profile gamblers, whether it was the Theranos people or the Firefest people or, any of these people that have this idea that we can do something extraordinarily big and we don't really have to plan it out because we're going to pinball along and figure it out, like Facebook and Uber and Apple and all these other things. It's such a prevalent mentality, and that's the fuel behind the fire. Everybody that I had talked to for this story, or a lot of people that I had talked to that were on board with the initial vision were, we expected this to be hard. We expected to run out of money. We expected this to be crazy. But, I think that only gets you so far if only a very small portion of your overall company expects things to work that way.
Well, in the first of your two articles, and I'm assuming you've got more stuff to come, no? Besides these first two?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Well, so The Curious Rise and Spectacular Crash of the Alliance of American Football, which is the first article, you'll find that on SI.com, and the second article, which is even more strange tales from such. And I'm sure it's the beginning of, dare I say, perhaps a book or something. I'm sure you've got a book in you at some point. It's very interesting. The thesis of your article, at least the first one, very much kind of starts out with the idea that this is almost very much a tech startup in look and in feel and perhaps in even terms of the cast of characters and the assumptions monetarily than it was a football league per se.
100%. And that's where I feel like their biggest failure was, right? And this goes back to, something that I wish, and if there does end up being a book here, I think I can explore a little bit more, is that, the NFL has been trying to integrate tech for years, and it's an extraordinarily difficult thing because there's this mountain of really useful data, but there's no one around to kind of explain it or translate it for the football people so it makes sense to them. And so, they always want to know, well, what can I do with this, or why do I need this? And so I think it was fascinating that Charlie really tried to microwave the progress in that sense and say, okay, you know what, not only am I going to start this thing with a tech backing, but I'm going to throw Steve Spurrier in a room here with people from Tesla and Lockheed Martin, and I'm going to make them try to speak the same language and explain things to each other. And so I think that was extraordinarily difficult, combined with the fact that, you have employees in 30 states in three rented office locations, no centralized business model. Everything's being done over text message and email and conference call. There was people outside of the business at that point looking in and saying, I don't think they're going to make it 2 months. And, I guess that they ended up being right.
Well, there are two things that strike me with that sort of thesis. Number one is that, many tech startups, especially these days, as things have gotten more, shall we say, mature, there's this raise as much money as you can, damn the profits, but get the scale and the traction so that good things on a bigger stage can happen, whether that's going public or whatever. But profits in the near term are not necessarily the issue. A lot of it is cash burn and establishing credibility, a minimal or and then some viable product. So that's number one. So that sort of brings up the cash issue. But number two, that sounds, and I think you're hinting at it, and we'll get maybe into some of the characters of this in a second. That sounds extremely different than the idea of playing professional football, right, which is a whole sort of different sensibility and dynamic than, raising a round of growth capital to conquer the world.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think the cast of characters here, and I mean, there were 952 employees. So you have to think about it that way. The cast of characters here could not have been more different, right? Because you were calling from the tech startup world. So maybe there were advertisers, marketing reps, people in charge of public relations that had worked at tech companies. And then there were people in that same aspect who came from the NFL. And, there would be meetings, as people would describe them to me, where, one side would be talking and the other side would be like, well, that's not how we do things at all. I mean, that's not right. That's not how we're supposed to do this. And so just the culture itself, I mean, Charlie had always tried to push, at least according to the employees, is, this culture first startup, and we were going to be built around this culture. But I think it was so difficult on a large scale. I think that the teams were good, and a lot of the team stuff was harmonious because football people are football people at the end of the day. But you're talking about a real clash of styles, of approaches to things, and, I 100% think that impacted stuff from day one.
Isn't that, though, why Bill Polian was kind of brought in at the earliest stage? It almost seemed to me, at least certainly that initial game on CBS, right? It seems like they were, being touted as almost joined at the hip. One was yin and one was yang. One sort of the tech entrepreneur, reality TV guy, ideal driven. And then, Bill Polian's more the nuts and bolts guy who, walks and talks football and puts all the actual pieces of an actual league together. Is that a fair or facile assessment?
Yeah, no, he was lending legitimacy to the operation, right? He was the guy that, because without him, you weren't going to be able to call Mike Martz or Steve Spurrier or Dennis Erickson or Brad Childress at the beginning before he left and say, hey, stake your reputation on this. Here's a 3-year deal. These are good people. He was sort of the gatekeeper for all this. And while, in the stories, he kind of ended up playing sort of a surprisingly smaller role than I had expected, he was certainly out front at the beginning, providing that football legitimacy, which is huge. I mean, you look at all these, I think there's now 4 more professional leagues starting up now in the next 2 years between the league that Don Yee, Tom Brady's agent, has out on the West Coast, the XFL. There's one that like Richard Sherman and the Bennetts are involved in that's going to be coming out in the next few years. All this stuff needs legitimacy. It needs somebody to get the professional names, the big guys, to come down and to stake their reputation on this. And so that's where Bill came in handy, and that's why I think even right after the league folded, he came out kind of guns blazing because this was his reputation, and I think he took it really seriously, and he took it really hard when the league folded after 8 weeks.
So, okay, for you before all this and the money and the investment and the specific situation of this league, right? Which, on paper makes a lot of sense. Right? You're making a lot of sense when you talk about a feeder league and an alternative to the one and done the sham, frankly, that NCAA football and basketball, for that matter, is becoming relative vis-a-vis the pros. But look, the whole, of any sport professionally in this country, right, that has gone through challenges and has percentage-wise failed more often than not in challenging established leagues, in particular the NFL, it's been pro football, right? I mean, probably twice as many leagues have come and gone in the realm of professional football probably than any other sport. And yet you have football people, I guess, maybe this time with the more tech-oriented siren song, that are seemingly just willing to step up and take yet another shot despite that history.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the one thing that you can't underestimate is how many people are orbiting in this professional football economy and how few jobs there actually are in the NFL. And that's what the Alliance was hoping to exploit a little bit because, at the end of the day, there are only 32 head coaches and so many position coaches and scouts and everything on down. And there are people that probably feel like either on either end of the spectrum that they were pushed out because they were too old, but they still had some good years left in them, or it was someone like a Cliff Kingsbury or a young Sean McVay that even before their first NFL shot, that's looking at trying to kind of microwave their career. And the same goes for the players as well. I mean, I think that there's never a shortage of that. And so if you're looking at it from a purely labor perspective, if you're Charlie or you're anybody else at the top of this league, you're thinking, oh yeah, I mean, these games are going to be on CBS or TNT or any of these things, and people are so desperate to just remain part of this orbit that we're never going to be at a shortage of employees. And I think that was one of the things that they were sort of cavalier about early on is, we could be selective even to a point of who we want to work in this league.
Well, all right, but you could also make that argument that might have been a little bit more alluring had Vince McMahon not decided to reboot the XFL himself. Maybe you could talk a minute or two about sort of maybe the origin of the AAF with respect to the XFL, because it sounds to me, and I think some of this was in your reporting, and I think I've read it elsewhere as well. Do I have this right that Ebersol, Charlie, that is, essentially approached McMahon with the idea of either rebooting the XFL or taking another shot with, maybe tech sort of as the base of it, and then was rebuffed, and hence the AAF's creation? Or, again, is that too easy or maybe not the full story?
I don't think that's the full story. I mean, at least from what I understand, and this is, talking to people close to Charlie, is that his relationship with Vince was always pretty good, and I think remained good, even after Dick and Vince and the initial XFL kind of fell apart. I think that, Charlie really, felt close to Vince and felt like it was something that, I don't think that there was an adversarial relationship necessarily there. The part about him initially approaching Vince, didn't surface in my reporting in particular, but I did get the sense that, and maybe this was just, private conversations or sort of this in-house feel that, like, if the alliance got out first and if they had maintained that energy that they had kind of gotten through that first week of the season, that they might be able to just maybe even knock the XFL off the lanes, or to force the XFL to be a competitive fall league, or to do something else to sort of get them out of their path. Because I think that was the big motivator, was to come out strong, to come out first, and to solidify the product before the XFL got on the field. And so, perhaps that was the case. I mean, maybe there was a desire to work with Vince initially. I mean, certainly the funding would have been attractive there. I mean, Vince is passionate and can float the league indefinitely because of the money that he's made from World Wrestling Entertainment. But, I definitely got the sense that regardless of his initial motivations, the XFL was always in their rearview mirror, or, I guess they could see them coming up ahead, whatever it was, whatever analogy you want to use, was certainly a major part of some of the decisions that they were making.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, and I'm sure this will play out as the oral history continues to unfold, and obviously we'll try to keep doing that in the months ahead on this little silly show, who sort of had the idea and or, the timing of sort of all this first, right? Because there was that period of time when, the AAF was announced and the XFL was announced. And I frankly don't remember the time frame, but, here it was. You went from 0 spring leagues to 2. And again, I've seen some parallels in other sports and in our exploration of other pro sports. But it seems to me in that rush, right, which seems like a noble idea. And if you're taking more of sort of that tech startup mentality, as we alluded to earlier, right, the idea of getting to the market first, right? You're investing money with profits be damned, right? Which again is the tech mantra. Doesn't sound illogical in that framing. But it does seem to me that, shall we say, compromises might have been made in terms of seeking that original funding. And in particular, this Reggie Fowler character, who seems to have been an interesting tipping point to maybe all of these cards falling apart later on.
Yeah, I mean, there are still people. Well, before I get to Reggie, I will say that, to your point too. I mean, if you try to think about it from Charlie's perspective, people are painting the XFL right now as more stable and, having learned all these lessons and, they'll be on a right path. But if you think about the climate, I think their launch announcements are probably like a month or two apart. But the XFL's initial press conference, the relaunch press conference with Vince McMahon, was very bizarre. It was very strange. It was full of this sort of Trump rhetoric. We're going to force everybody to stand for the national anthem. We're not going to sign any players with a criminal background. Very much sort of an homage to, hey, everybody who was disillusioned during Kaepernick, this is your football league. We're the Make America Great Again football league. And so I think that before they got like Oliver Luck involved and before he came in to sort of straighten things out as their commissioner, there was maybe a sense that like, okay, this might not launch at all. This is very strange. As soon as this sort of national sentiment sort of dissipates, and we saw that with the NFL this past year where, the ratings came back strong and fan sentiment seems to be back at level, that maybe this wasn't going to work at all, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody was going to flock to something like that. But yeah, I mean, all of a sudden you're trying to be first to market. You're talking to NFL people, people in the sports billionaire realm, and there's not that many, right? I mean, it's a shallow pool, and so Reggie Fowler's name surfaced a bunch of times. From my understanding, he had come to the Alliance as, kind of a guy with a rehabilitated image. He was a minority owner of the Vikings, but had a lot of legal trouble and funding trouble at that point. But, at some point in, I think it was about June of 2018. So, we're still about 6 months from launch, that this is when their initial kind of discussions, their fundraising was involved. And, he's sitting down with Charlie and this initial team of Alliance of American Football people and saying, hey, this is great. I got $170 million that I'm prepared to spend on you guys. That'll get you through your first year. We'll kind of float it week by week and give it to you in this time. But I'm happy to sign a contract, and here is all my bank accounts in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, and here's all the proof that I have this money.
But wasn't also Tom Dundon also part of this initial conversation as well? And Tom, obviously, a bigger character later on in the end of the short life of this league. But I got to think that he and a bunch of others were also approached at the time, some saying yes, and probably a lot more like Dundon kind of saying thanks, but we'll wait and see, or not right now.
Yeah, I think it was a lot more, hey, let's see how this plays out, right? Let's see how it goes, because the appeal with Reggie Fowler was that he did not, like other people, have the desire to be the sole investor, the controlling investor, right? And so the strategy was, okay, let's get somebody on board to get us to launch, right? And then once we get into space, everyone's going to see how cool this is, and we're going to do a second round of fundraising and a third round of fundraising, and then we're really going to, attract investors. We're going to, and then that's where the pipe dreams start. In 3 years, we could take this public as a tech IPO. We could start selling these franchises off, like a popular sushi chain or something like that, and so that's where all these kind of grand visions started. And with Fowler, really what they were looking at is, okay, he's the guy he's the initial fuel to get us to launch, and then once we're off the ground, everything will be fine.
All right, we're going to take a quick, brief pause, and we want to remind you that our friends at Audible are offering to you, our listeners, an opportunity to get a free audiobook download from their amazing array of over 190,000 titles to choose from. When you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats, and that's the place to go to get your free audiobook download, courtesy of us and Audible. And it's just something you can cancel at any time, and you can keep the book for as long as your device exists. And like I said before, there's just a ton of choices available to you to burn up that free credit, including a bunch in the realm of our forgotten sports little genre here, including in the realm of basketball. If you fancy yourself a fan of the old ABA, for example, 2 great books on the great Julius Erving that might be worth using your credit for. One, of course, is The Rise and Rise of Julius Erving. It's called Doc, and it's written by Vincent Malazzi and narrated by David Cromet. You could use your credit for that book, and it's a great sort of interview-style background on the life and times of Dr. J from all sides. But if that's not good enough for you, why not try the autobiography? It's called Dr. J, the Autobiography, of course. It's written by Dr. J in concert with Carl Greenfeld. And it's narrated by Dr. J himself, Julius Erving. And you could use your credit for that book, as well as, like I said, thousands and thousands of other books, not just only in basketball and basketball history, but in a whole host of genres and topics. By all means, give them a try. Why don't you? It's risk-free, for God's sakes. audibletrial.com/goodseats. Yes, audibletrial.com/goodseats. That's the link. And that's where you're going to get your free audiobook download. Again, you can cancel at any time. And once you do download that book for free, and after you cancel it, if you choose to do that, it's yours to keep. So you can enjoy in perpetuity for as long as your device lives the downloaded book free and gratis, courtesy of yours truly here at Good Seats Still Available and our friends at Audibles. Thank you, Audible. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you joining our conversation once again. So in your reporting, when, it seems to me that the football side of it, right, it obviously attracted quite a few well-regarded coaches and administrators. It certainly got the attention of players. It seems to me that at least that part of the marketing spiel was working, right? People felt that it was legitimate enough and solid enough to pursue, especially if I was a player or a coach or some other aspect of managing a team and actually playing the actual game of football.
Yeah, and that was never a problem, because if you think about how all this works, right? One of the players that we talked about in this story was Adrian Robinson, former fourth-round pick of the Giants, and just thinking about how this whole chain works, right? I mean, he's sitting there, he hears about the league. Of course you call your agent, and of course the agent's interested, and he's going to push you no matter what, because he wants his 3% of your $250,000. And of course, the trainer's going to want you because he wants the cut, and he wants clients, and he wants NFL bodies in his training facility. And all of a sudden you get all this revved up again, and you're providing opportunities not only for the player but everyone in that orbit, whether it was agents, trainers, personnel guys, accountants, money managers, like all these people that get deactivated when these players aren't playing anymore, and all of a sudden they get to come back to life, or they get to add another client or add another couple $1,000 to their to their bank account. And so I think that anytime you can spark that kind of put that initial spark out there, you're going to get people forcing players in droves to these leagues. And I think the same a little bit can be said about personnel people, especially guys who still need to make some money, especially guys that were a few years from retirement maybe and miss that NFL lifestyle and that NFL paycheck. It's very attractive when you're throwing around money like that.
Well, but in the summer of 2018, though, there's some very straightforward combines, and I also, you maybe wonder, some of the initial salaries that were sort of thrown out there. I mean, 3 years guaranteed at $250 a year. Or sorry, a total of $250,000. I mean, with performance bonuses and all those kinds of things. I mean, it seems, I don't know, if I'm a player that's been, sort of on the treadmill of NFL tryouts and hasn't sort of, maybe played some arena games and still looking for that last shot. I mean, I don't want to say it sounds too good to be true, but I don't know. It might have been. Maybe the answer is probably obvious now, but I mean, that's an attractive amount of money and a certain level of security, I guess, for players who maybe are not going to be stars, but that's, you can survive on that and play the game that you love.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than attractive, and part of the reason why is this was launched with like very egalitarian ideas, specifically focused at the player, right? So you had two of their initial investors were Justin Tuck and Jared Allen, who locker room leaders, definitely guys that were well respected in the league. And then you bring in Hines Ward, Troy Polamalu, all these people that had a tremendous amount of equity with current and former players. And then you're saying not only are we going to give you $250,000 over 3 years, but if you're a quarterback or a wide receiver or a face of the franchise type, we're going to have incentives not only for scoring, but for community appearance, media interviews, where you're going to be able to double that, right? So you're going to make $500,000 in 3 years, which for an out-of-work football player is an unbelievable life-changing amount of money.
Certainly.
There were guys that moved families down there. I heard stories that, the players at the Marriott, the Courtyard in Arizona, there were cribs, there were full families in these hotel rooms. And, this was a gold rush for people. They really thought that this was going to be a life-changing opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess to the outside observer, right, it seemed like things were at least on the football side seeming to come together, right? You had 8 markets chosen, which seemed to be, fairly well thought out. Maybe you could speak to that for a second. I mean, not trying to sort of sit in NFL cities as an alternative, but literally, for the most part, sort of in these oft sought after football hungry markets, right? That maybe had very little competition, especially during the spring, with other sports. And the logos and the team names and just the whole sort of graphic identity, all that stuff seemed to be pretty top notch and pretty professional from an outsider's perspective. No?
Yes and no. So I think that some of the locations were brilliant, right? San Antonio is a football-starved market, and that was a place that was absolutely heartbroken when the Alliance closed down. That was a profitable market for them. It was very easy for them to sell tickets there. They loved the San Antonio market. And then you had places like Salt Lake, which were so bad that, they were looking at moving the franchise at the end of the year, and they were courting other markets like Detroit, and, they were kind of hoping to get off the ground somewhere else. And so, yeah, I mean, it was funny because, people have said to me, oh, well, the cosmetic aspect of it was always there. It was kind of like a Hollywood movie set where they had everything dressed up to a point. And that's true to a point, but then, it's also funny, like these little details that you pick up along the way where, I was talking to someone in the advertising realm that said, we talked to them about a Super Bowl commercial, and this is January December of 2018, 2 months to launch, and there are uniforms that aren't done yet. And so there are certain teams that we can't put in the commercial because all the stuff isn't done yet, and so it's funny to me that, like, yes, I mean, some of this stuff was really well thought out, but then, like, just the other side of that, like somebody actually getting in there and finishing it, it's funny, and sometimes that stuff was just overlooked.
Well, one of the things that I've taken away in the short time this league's been around is, and having been in the media space for some time and on a professional level, I thought one of the well thought out things, or at least it came across on the screen, was the sort of unified graphics, regardless of where it was being broadcast. It almost felt like it was well produced in that regard, right? Everything was consistent. There seemed to be some level of consistency to the actual television schedule, although it seems some of the pieces didn't come together till the kind of the last minute. But you have to give them some credit for, I think the television production looked really good. I mean, it was some of those cameras and stuff, pretty complicated stuff. It did seem, I mean, maybe that's because that's the reality producer in Charlie Ebersol coming out. I don't know.
It 100% looked right. It felt right and it looked right. And I think that was the biggest thing that they had going for them. That was the biggest thing that, for Charlie going in is, this had to look the right way. It had to feel like professional football. And so I think that their biggest fear was always the football. I mean, they closed off training camps to journalists. They wouldn't let anybody see the on-field product until the launch because the reality was that they were terrified, whether this would look bad, whether it would look like bad football. And, lo and behold, that first night on CBS, it felt like you were watching, a regular primetime football game. And it was funny. I talked to somebody who was working in one of their executive offices there that said that, after seeing that, they cried. They cried throughout most of that first action that they saw because it was like, okay, we're saved. This is fine. As long as our biggest fear was the football not being right. And now that we have that and it looks right and it feels right, we're saved. We're going to be good for the next 3 years.
And the football did seem to look right. Now, I have a decent understanding of the pro game. I followed it since being a kid. Clearly I knew I was not looking at sort of NFL caliber play. And yeah, you could clearly see the rust, especially in the first couple of weeks in terms of the quality of play. But it certainly wasn't as embarrassing as the original XFL was in 2001, which I think everybody would agree was farcical and underwhelming. And I think actually one of the germs of Charlie's idea of doing it right, so to speak, inclusive of the on-field performance, which I think the original XFL didn't have really going for it in its certainly first few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I 100% agree with that. And not only did it look good, but there were some fun ideas. I mean, and there were smart ideas, right? You had the Sky Judge. You were in the booth with the referee as he was talking through the call. I mean, that's the kind of transparency that the NFL runs away from at every angle, but that their fans crave. It's just, okay, we understand that maybe not every call is going our way, but walk us through it. Don't make Mike Pereira do it. I want to hear the actual official reason with it. They had mic'd up the coaches, and so, you'd catch all these funny moments where, Steve Spurrier was saying, well, if I'm going to throw it to him again, he better catch it or else I'm going to bench him. And, it's funny. It's good football. It's why we watch all this NFL film stuff in the off season once it's edited by the teams and stuff like that for a taste of what goes on the sidelines. And they had, other fun ideas like, the onside kick rule where, and you could either opt for an onside kick or you could go for it. And it would be a 4th and 15 on your own 25-yard line. I mean, that made it to owners' meetings. That made it to a vote with the NFL. And so a lot of this stuff was like, okay, not only are we putting together a fairly decent broadcast with some good players, but we're also kind of nipping at the NFL's heels a little bit. Hey, here's some things that your fans want. They want all this stuff, and we're just going to pump it straight into their veins.
All right, I want to come back to the NFL thing for a second because it's really a spur that is obviously another layer of this story. But a lot of your article, the first one in particular, again, frames a lot of the valuation and or the innovation coming from the tech and almost as a petri dish, if you will, for gambling with mobile technology and data and all that kind of stuff, using essentially or effectively live football kind of as the grease or the oil, if you will, of the engine. But it's ironic because here we are talking about how, great the presentation on screen and the quality of play, not as bad as people might have feared. Those seem to be going well for the league. Yet, ironically, it seems like the tech stuff was actually kind of behind the curve, which ironically was kind of one of the original propositions of investing in this league in the first place. Yeah.
It's funny because it depends on who you talk to. And, I got the chance to speak to a few engineers, some people who really kind of understood this from an intrinsic level. And it depends on who you talk to. Either, there are some people even now that fully believe that in less than 2 years, this team of people that work together on the alliance will be leading innovators in the sports world somewhere, and it'll be kind of a funny footnote in their history. And then there are people that say that this was awful. I mean, we don't understand why they were making this money or what they were doing, and so I think it speaks to that divide a little bit. But also, one of the interesting things that I learned from the reporting in this, and that's something that I kind of want to expand on in some later articles, is that the NFL. Part of the reason that they were interested here is because they can't be flexible. It's such a behemoth. They were described to me sort of as like IBM in the 80s, where they were so big that they can't deter from what they do, right? They can't be agile and take chances. And so this was the alliance. This is where they were going to come into play. Is okay. I mean, did you ever experiment with these kind of headsets? Did you ever experiment with, fiber optic cables running around here? And, here's how we can correct your data. Here's a better way to read the GPS chips in the shoulder pads. We're going to experiment with all this stuff. GPS in the footballs, $700 footballs. And so, that was the appeal, I think, to the NFL was, okay, it's not our money. We're not spending it. And then if anything's good, we'll just either buy it from them or we'll make our own version of it and license the technology. And so I think that was where the NFL was like, okay, I mean, if these guys are pledging themselves as a tech company, let's let them make all the mistakes and see what happens.
Yeah, it's classic corporate approach to innovation and stuff, right? Where, things, yeah. It's classic straight out of business school 201 for, how to buy, if you will, or acquire innovation when it gets a little too close for comfort. But all right, let me ask you then about the NFL more squarely. What was the official and maybe unofficial feeling of the NFL towards this league? Because it does seem to me that, and I don't know if it was a smokescreen or some other a feint of concept to sort of distract from the other issues at hand, but it does seem to me that there was some level of expectation amongst some in the organization that there would be or was either implicitly or down the road or whatever, some kind of desired relationship in some way, shape, or form, maybe, to come over time with the NFL. But that strikes me as being a little naive, given that it's, for example, CBS, right, broadcasting the very first game. They're a rights holder, a major rights holder to the NFL. How much of that is with the NFL's knowledge and blessing, so to speak, and how much of it is not? It's a long-winded way of saying, what is the NFL relationship here, if there was any, or misplaced expectations?
I would say that the back door was open, right? And so what I mean by that is, remember, some of these games were broadcast on NFL Network with NFL talent and personalities that are still actively under NFL contracts. There was Steve Mariucci or Andrew Siciliano or all their horde of NFL Network talent and broadcasters and all that stuff. So I think that there is absolutely an interest in a developmental league in some respect, but they just don't want to pay for it. They don't want to lend their credence to something that's going to sink because then it hurts the brand. And so they've basically let all these companies just come out and fight each other tooth and nail to see who survives. And so I think that's what we're seeing right now. And so the NFL, a source in the league to describe to me is always interested. I mean, just curious, keeping an eye on it, having it through a microscope and picking it apart. And so I don't think that there was ever an adversarial thing. I do think, though, you're right. There was more of an expectation that, especially when Tom Dundon came aboard, that one day not only were they going to be using third, fourth string NFL players on their roster, but that the NFL would actually pay for it. They would pay for those salaries because they would pay for the time and the coaching and the instruction while none of this other stuff was going on, none of their camps were going on.
So when Dundon was sort of sought after as sort of the last minute sort of infuser / savior in the wobbly last weeks. Now, in the press is one thing, and maybe behind the scenes is another. Maybe you have some insight into this, but was his expectation? I mean, it sounded like, based on what I've read, right, and some of your reporting, that there was this, in his mind, expectation of some kind of actual commitment of the NFL to do some of what you just said, and it didn't seem like it was going to happen anytime soon, if ever.
Yeah, so this is me speculating because, again, as we said at the end of that article, Reggie, Tom, and Charlie all declined to speak with us, for this. But, we were able to kind of talk to people in their orbit and people who understand, how their minds work. And the sense that I got, so I guess forgive me, I'm going to speculate a little bit, is that, we described their initial partnership as sort of a shotgun wedding. I mean, this thing happened over the phone. The deal was done in less than 24 hours. And at least what it sounded like to me was that two very different people, Charlie and Tom, getting together and trying to hammer this out. And, maybe some of the things that were promised orally it became very clear that they were not going to happen very quickly. And so if you're a bottom line business guy like Tom Dundon, who comes from, the subprime auto loans world, you're not going to sit around and, watch all these unfulfilled promises stack up and keep pouring money into nothing, and I think that in his mind, at least from what it sounded like to me, was that 70 million was the number. And then once he got to that, it was, okay, if I don't see what I want here, I'm done. And he held firm to that promise.
Yeah, and Dundon, though, strikes me as the antithesis of, the sort of tech-oriented type investor who, has some level of patience and recognizes a significant amount of money needs to be put into stuff. It sounds to me almost like, now that's not to deny his success elsewhere, right? Previous to getting to where he is now, and as a sports owner extraordinaire in other places. I get the sense though that he was like, well, Charlie might have thought about it as tech plus football. Dundon was almost like football and football, right? I mean, it sounds like Dundon was the guy trying to sort of figure out what the TV situation was, right? And in your writing, it almost feels to me, and I'm sure he's not naive, right? Maybe he was surprised to find out that the league was paying for its airtime versus being paid for it, or the idea of the NFL actually, stepping up and being a quote unquote partner of sorts beyond just being on the NFL network. I don't know. It almost seems like that was like the first and foremost thing that Dundon was going to do, was basically get agreements and or whatever from the football people. And it didn't seem like that was going to come anytime on his timetable.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. From what it seemed like to me, it was, well, I'm going to fact check everything here. So you say that we have a harmonious relationship with the NFLPA. Well, I'm going to lead the next call, and I'm going to ask them, not, okay, well, in the future, or this sounds good 5 years from now, what are you going to do next week, the week after that, and by the end of the season, can we have a deal? And, I think that was alarming to people in the alliance, because they're like, we're still a startup. We're just trying to become part of this ecosystem. And Tom is like, nope, this is my money. I need to know if this is going to happen now. And I think the same thing happened with the TV deals, where, Charlie is obviously from that television side, and he's saying, well, everything's great. In 2 years or 3 years, things are going to look this way. And, to Tom's credit, I mean, I'd said, I talked to one television executive who said, yeah, he called me and he asked for my opinion. He asked, how long until we're going to make money on this, and what do you think of our property? And so, I think it's really interesting to see how that worked out, where it was almost like on the fly, he was trying to figure out if this was a good idea or not.
But it also seems to me that, now again, we'll see how the story plays out further. There's a lot more yet to come. And then obviously the looking back in terms of how the story played out. But, I could, having done enough investigation of teams and leagues in various circumstances over the decades in this stupid little show, I can pretty much with confidence sort of say that you almost wonder if you could have stuck it out for the rest of the year, right? The rest of the season, not too far to go, right? They obviously, downsized the championship game. They were going to move it to that Frisco, Texas, Dallas Cowboys facility. They were going to be on CBS again that those days after the league collapsed. In my mind, any leverage you could have had, right, kind of goes by the wayside by trying to accelerate it in the middle or near the end of the season, right? If you can kind of limp along and get that extra TV exposure, at least you'll have a full season under your belt to then, vet and then, make the decision that perhaps, you double down or you do things a little differently. I mean, it seems, again, from an outsider's perspective, unreasonable. Again, it's not my money, right? To expect things to happen that quickly in the midst of the heat of the moment of the season, despite the, shall we say, desperation, and somebody wanting to call his own shots because he's the one injecting the cash into the enterprise.
Yeah, so I would say two things to that. The first is I agree, and that's why Tom, I think, was such a bad choice. And, what's funny is you talk to all these people that are left, who are looking for jobs and stuff now, and, they're all saying, we tried to tell Charlie, like, ask these other people, there are millionaires and billionaires in our home cities who love this team and who love this league and who want to own a franchise, like, and they see the vision. And I think that was what was particularly frustrating to a lot of people around them, is that whatever happened, or we know what happened now with Reggie, and the urgency there just created this sort of frantic shotgun wedding, when in reality you probably had some momentum after that first week of the season to kind of pair off and to say, okay, let's get an investor from Salt Lake. Let's get an investor from San Antonio. Let's get an investor from Orlando. There's enough millionaires or multimillionaires in these cities. The guys can hop on and really develop like a nice little coffer here of money. But I guess to play devil's advocate from Dundon's perspective, you're probably looking at one of the your salaries get bigger in year two, right? Because if you're in your second year as a player, you have a built-in raise, and then you're also looking at it as, okay, well, the XFL is not going away, and so they're going to be up against us head to head. What are our TV deals looking like for year two? I mean, I know I'm going to have to pay, but am I going to have to pay more? Am I going to have to get into a bidding war with Vince McMahon over primetime television slots for these games? And so I think that, for the cautious investor, it's like, okay, I already threw away $70 million. Why would I throw away $170 million?
Yeah, sort of the sunk investment sort of theory. It's like, why pay more for? Yeah, I again, I'm sure across the lens of time, right, this is a rough draft, I guess, of the history of this story. All right, a couple of quick things to wrap up, and this has been great. I appreciate it. So, number one, in the immediate term, what's happening in the ashes of this league in terms of it's clear. I mean, Chapter 7, obviously, the league's even saying don't bother, registering as a creditor because we have no money to pay. But it's clear that there are a lot of people, and frankly, a lot of people not talking for various reasons, that want to sort of see their legal options sort of play out. What do you think is going to play out in terms of the ashes of this league, the people and the legalities of it?
Yeah, I think that there will be lawsuits, and there's already a few, and I've talked to several people who are planning on filing, whether it's disgruntled former employees, and rightfully disgruntled former employees or players, or whether they're going to join a class action or anything like that. I think that the bankruptcy proceedings are going on. We'll see all this brand new equipment that the Alliance bought auctioned off, to try to recover some of this money and maybe start paying back some of the millions of dollars that they owe people. But I'll tell you what, I mean, this kind of speaks to, I actually found this out the other day after we published our second story. There are still salespeople and advertising people and marketing people who are in new jobs that are taking phone calls from small businesses wondering where their money is and trying to help them. These are people that don't work for the Alliance anymore, that were fired over text message or email, that are still communicating with these people and, listening to their problems and trying to help them find a solution. And, it's totally amazing to me that I think that's still going on.
Well, it speaks to the passion and the belief that certain people had of the organization, and maybe potentially continues to live on elsewhere. So, all right, let me ask you the second question then. What do you think, based on what you've been able to determine from your reporting, as well as what we've all been sort of seeing with the XFL, which seems to have gotten a little bit more mature and a little bit more stable, and Oliver Luck, kind of saying the right things and, maybe keeping Vince sort of in check and not repeating the disastrous follies of the past, despite using the same name, which is a curious eyebrow raiser. What do you think the XFL's chances are, and or, relative to what the AAF experienced going into next season?
I think they'll at least make it to their championship game.
You think so?
Unlike I do. I think we're going to definitely see a season 2 of the XFL for a couple reasons. The first is that the funding is indefinite, and this is a second round of a passion project for Vince. I mean, he's not going to bow out at this point, and there's still an appetite for live sports, right? There's still a desire. Because it's really one of the only things that's left for a lot of these television behemoths is to get live sports and live properties on television. So there's still a mutual flirtation there. The XFL did a good job, I think, on their TV deals where they're not paying, but they're not making any money. Sort of a mutual, sort of a back rub deal. So I think their TV deals were smart. I think that some of the coaches that they've hired are good. You're going to get the same level of talent, I think, or a similar level of talent personnel-wise And, that's what you need. I mean, and if anything else comes into play later on, the app, the gambling, any of that kind of stuff, that's great. But I think in the interim, they've proven that, even at the lowest, Alliance ratings were similar to, major market college basketball games or regular season hockey games. And so I think that there's certainly an appetite for that somewhere.
Do you think there'll be any blacklisting of AAF participants when it comes to the XFL, or?
I don't think so. I think whatever happens, because that's another part of the, bankruptcy proceedings. I mean, obviously they had to free these players from their contracts to play in the NFL, and so we'll see what kind of happens from that standpoint there. But I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's certainly an understanding from the Alliance's side that, like, we can't handle any more bad public relations. And so if they want anything at this point, they can take it, shoot, if they want the equipment, they can have it. I mean, I think that at this point, there are so many people there that just want this to be forgotten that they're going to be willing to kind of make that happen at any cost.
Well, and here's the irony, right? I mean, the XFL coming back, I mean, talk about something that lots of people, and probably to a certain extent, Vince too, would love to see forgotten too. I mean, in the age of YouTube, I mean, the 2001 season is all there for you to watch, right? On all the networks. I mean, it was a spectacle and then some, and not necessarily in the most positive ways, right? I just it boggles the mind, but it's also the audacity continues, right? I mean, juxtapose the AAF markets versus the XFL markets. I mean, we're talking New York and Seattle and Houston. I mean, these are not, and the big stadiums in those places, right? So I don't know how more modest he is this time around. I mean, maybe the bravado is a little less, and the operations are a bit more, transparent and methodical. But man, it's 10,000, 20,000 people in a MetLife stadium is not necessarily going to be the best TV product, even though they've got good TV deals.
Yeah, that is certainly something that was brought up to me. I mean, just the optics of 9,000 people in a frozen, February MetLife Stadium. I mean, that's going to get pretty bleak, but the only thing that I keep coming back to is there must be some pot at the end of the rainbow here. There must be some treasure buried somewhere if you can stick on as a off-season football league, or eventually glob on as a developmental football league, because if not, like you said, I mean, why would you keep trying? Why would you keep going through all this effort and embarrassment and bad PR? I mean, just, the backlash that the Alliance received was devastating to people's careers. And I think that, a lot of things that people might not recover from. And so if you're Vince McMahon and you're taking this risk after seeing what can happen in the social media age, there must be some payoff to this. There must be, and that's what keeps everybody coming back and keeps everybody trying.
All right, last question, and then I'll let you promote. What do you have in your hopper in terms of taking this story further? You've got some really good articles in SI. I'll let you sort of describe the titles of those, where people can find it. You've got your podcast and the column that you do for SI. Do you see more of a story coming here, and if so, in what forms and fashions? Is it more articles? Is there a documentary in here somewhere? Is there a book in there? I was going to say pony in there somewhere. What other ways does this story, do you think, have to play out? And do you think you're going to be part of telling that story?
I would love to be lucky enough to be considered for any of that. I mean, I'm thrilled to come on and just talk about it now. I mean, the fact that, I'm just grateful that a lot of people in the league kind of, opened up and were willing to let me tell their stories in the wake of something that was really terrible and life-changing for them. And so, however that plays out, I'm sure there's going to be interest, in just doing rounds of reporting for this. I came across a lot of people who talked to other reporters, and so I'm sure we'll see other stories and, I'm sure feature pieces and video and all that kind of stuff. So, I don't think this is done by any stretch of the imagination, just because, like we've said, the full breadth of this hasn't been realized. I mean, Reggie Fowler still has to go to trial for bank fraud, and, there's a cryptocurrency element to that. that, a lot of people in that industry are kind of buzzing about. And, we've yet to see where all these players land. We've yet to see where all these executives land. We've yet to see, any of this, how the bankruptcy plays out, whether or not these people are going to get any of their money back, all these small businesses. And so I think that there's a million stories to be told. And, I think there's a lot of people who do want their voices heard. So I think it's been good to, and encouraging to see a lot of people reporting on this and just kind of lending a soapbox to some of these small businesses and some of these people that, kind of weren't mentioned, I think, in the initial round of reporting.
Well, if you're listening to this and it's the first time you're hearing of Conor Orr or this story, right? The two seminal articles that you want to read are both from Sports Illustrated, SI.com, or maybe a printed version if you can find one of those. They still do print magazines, by the way. The Curious Rise and Spectacular Crash of the Alliance of American Football, and More Strange Tales from the Collapse of the AAF, and I'm sure more to come. Where else can people follow you and or listen to you? Twitter, your podcast stuff. Where else can they find you and keep abreast of the story that to the extent that you continue to pursue it?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So my Twitter is just my name, at Conor Orr, Conor, and my last name is Orr, Orr, one word. We do once a week. We tape the Monday morning quarterback podcast with Albert Breer and Jenny Vrentis at Sports Illustrated, and so you can find all of our podcasts in the MMQB podcast feed. And absolutely, I mean, it's never been a better time to subscribe to the print magazine. Keep print alive. We got great deals that you can check out for print subscriptions at SI.com. I'd encourage people to pick it up. You could get basically a year's worth of magazines for what you would pay at Barnes & Noble just for the Alliance issue. So I would definitely encourage people to check it out.
And as a former summer intern back in 1987 at Sports Illustrated myself, and I'm sure the parent company of Meredith Corporation, at least until they sell the damn thing, would be very very happy that you're pitching and marketing this to the full extent that you just have. I thank you tremendously for making time. And again, like I said, I think this is, it's our first little brush on this. And frankly, as they say, journalists are sort of the first take on history, right? And arguably that's what you're writing, whether you believe it or not, right? This is a story that will continue to play out. The idea of challenger football leagues will continue to play out, to be continued next year with the XFL, and many more wrinkles, I think, to come. And hopefully it's a cottage industry for you in particular. Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it was just really appreciative of everybody that did reach out, especially during a tough time in their lives. And so, in that sense, it was, a privilege to be able to kind of lend them some closure and to kind of help them sort some stuff out. But I really appreciate you having me on. It was, it's a lot of fun talking about this. I mean, obviously, like you said, this is going to be part of the football culture and part of the football, zeitgeist or whatever you want to say for years to come. And so it was definitely one of the more fascinating things I got the chance to work on. Well, I hinted at the beginning of the show and even during the interview that we are just scratching the surface on this topic. The AAF is, not even out of bankruptcy court. There's plenty of lawsuits yet to come. I think a lot of primary participants in this story who have yet to really even say anything yet, probably for legal reasons. There's a lot more that's going to come out of all this, and we're suspecting that Conor will be front and center for a lot of those stories as they trickle out. We encourage you, while you wait for more stories to come out, to make sure that you inhale these two great articles that he wrote over the last couple of weeks at Sports Illustrated's website at si.com. It's both articles by Conor Orr. One's called The Curious Rise and Spectacular Crash of the Alliance of American Football, and the follow-up piece is called More Strange Tales from the Collapse of the AAF. And I'm certain that many more writings are yet to come. And you can follow Conor on Twitter at Conor Orr. So that's CONORORR. That's all one word. Conor Orr, at Conor Orr. That's CONORORR. And you can find him, obviously, on the Monday morning quarterback section of Sports Illustrated, the podcast that's there, and all kinds of other stuff that Conor's writing at SI.com. Check him out early and often. Give him a follow on Twitter. And I am certain that we'll hear more from Mr. Orr in the weeks and months to come on this topic, as well as anything related to football. God forbid the XFL. I suspect that that's probably going to be on his docket too. And we look forward to staying in touch with him. And obviously, when major events warrant, yes, he says, on this topic and more, we will hopefully get reconnected and have Conor Orr back on the show. We thank him for being part of this week's show. We also thank you for listening, of course, to this week's show. By all means, you want to keep up with what's going on this little program. By all means, bookmark goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's where you're going to find out all of what's going on with our little doings here. You're going to find all of our episodes, dozens and dozens now, since, early part of 2017. Geez, it just seems like yesterday. But all the old episodes are there for you. You can download them and share them and do whatever you want. Subscribe wherever you get podcasts, so make sure you don't miss an episode that we have. We publish every week, for God's sakes. And, of course, you can follow us on social media. On Twitter, you'll find us at Good Seats Still. On Instagram, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. You will find us also, for whatever reasons, on Facebook. There's a page devoted to us there. You can send us email at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And you can also subscribe to our little email newsletter that we send out each and every weekend to give you a head start on what our episode's going to be for that following week. And you'll find a link to that on our website as well. Lots of fun, cool stuff. You want to buy stuff or books or other media that we feature, or other cool t-shirts and some of our great sponsors, all that stuff, you'll find it at goodseatsstillavailable.com. By all means, check us out and keep doing so, will you? And by all means, too, check out our friends at Podfly Productions. Those are the good folks that put our collective pieces together, and in particular, our good friend, the good doctor, Jerry Payne, our chief cook and bottle washer, who puts all of our pieces together. We appreciate his efforts each and every week for doing so. And you want to find out more about Podfly, by all means, check them out at their website at podfly.net. All right, we are done for another week. We appreciate your listening. Until next week, the ticket window is now sadly closed. Take care, everybody.